Daddy, we doing?
I'm doing a podcast, Dizzy. Hello, this is the Too Cool for School podcast. I'm your host, Yannick, and on today's episode, we are discussing a topic that impacts half of the population, but is often surrounded by stigma and misinformation. So if you're someone who experiences periods, supports someone with periods, or you just want to know the science and the societal impact behind it, then this is the episode for you. So I'm joined by an amazing guest today, and I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Thank you, Yannick, for having me. So my name is Candace, and I'm the founder of the Gynae Project, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I echo everything that Yannick has said with regards to if you experience a period or even if you don't, this information affects everybody. I'm really glad to be here.
Good stuff. So can you tell us more about like the genesis of the Gynae Project and why you felt that was important to sort of educate people on?
Yeah. So to be honest, most of my life, my periods have been like very disruptive. But by disruptive, I mean like just affecting my day-to-day life. And in a lot of ways, I felt like, okay, maybe it's just me. This is just my body. It's similarly like if you were to have a headache, if we both have a headache at the same time, it might affect you differently to how it affects me. And that's kind of what I attributed in terms of the maths I did in my head for my own period. I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I guess mine's just heavier than somebody else's, which is fine. But then I found that it was really being, it was really disrupting my life, man. Like, I would plan things around it. It would be really heavy. And guys, you came here for this conversation, so we're going to get into it. It'd be really heavy, and I just feel like I had to do so much more architecture around my life that I thought, actually, maybe there's something going on here. So when I was like, I want to say 25, although I don't know if I was 25, I sought medical advice. So I went to my GP and I said, look, like I don't think something's quite right with my period. This is kind of what I'm experiencing. And fortunately, my GP actually advocated for me. She was like, all right, cool. Let's investigate this further. Let's see what answers we can get. Let's do some blood tests. Let's do some, primarily we started with blood tests and some different medication to just try to initially make the pain subside. So after that, I was taking the medication that she prescribed, which was tranexamic acid and mefenamic acid. They are medications that help with blood flow, and intense pain.
Okay.
So when I took those, I was like, wow, this is like a miracle. Like, I feel great.
Yeah.
The pain was gone. It wasn't as heavy. I thought, this is fantastic. But like anything you do over time, you get used to it. So my body started to get used to it, and then the pain came back. So after that, she was like, all right, cool, let's do some other testing. So I did blood tests for other things. They were looking for other things, namely anemia. So we did some blood tests around that, and then she signposted me to a gynecologist and a consultant to do some ultrasounds just to check to see what was actually going on in my womb and uterus. And that went on, I'd say, for the best part of 2.5 years, just back and forth testing, back and forth testing, back and forth testing, back and forth testing. And when I eventually got a diagnosis, from the moment I had that initial conversation with my GP to when I got a diagnosis and then had a procedure, was a 6-year process.
Wow.
So for any other medical concern, you wouldn't be expected to wait that long. Like if you had a crippling headache, you'd expect to be able to go to a doctor, signposted to the right place, and within a couple of months you at least know what's going on. You can kind of be having treatment. So I had I had surgery for polyps, cysts, and a small fibroid, and afterwards my period actually got worse.
Wow.
So that was like ghetto, man. I thought, wow, after not only have I gone through like a 6-year process of like trial and error, I thought this was going to be my resolution. And it just wasn't. So I was like, all right, cool. I now need to think about what happens next. So I went back to my GP and said, look, like my period's actually got worse. She was like, based on the surgery I had, it's very invasive, so naturally like everything inside you is kind of a little bit misaligned, so you're gonna find that your period is a little bit worse, but it will self-regulate. Fortunately, which it did a couple months after, but I still experienced pain, I still experienced cramping, and I thought, how many other women are experiencing these same symptoms? And how can there be a space to, one, have an initial conversation, and how can they be better signposted to support? And that is kind of where the Gynae Project came from.
No, that's amazing, and thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask, because you said that this is something that you've been experiencing for, you know, your whole life, since you had, you know, your first period or early periods. Why did you wait until 25? Like, what was the point where you felt, you know what,
Yeah.
actually, like, this is too much, and why didn't you have that, you know, discussion?
Yeah, that's a
you know,
really good
earlier?
question. That's a really good question. And I think this is part of why the Gynae Project started to initiate that earlier conversation, because I'm a big believer in early intervention. So the earlier you can have that conversation, like girls are starting their period as young as 9.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a lot of ways, like the earlier the better. I think for me, I just kind of brushed it as it was normal. So I didn't actually think anything was wrong as such. It's actually only when I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine who had fibroids. She was the first woman I knew to have fibroids. And she was like, oh, like, it sounds like you might want to see someone about this. And it was the advocacy from her that propelled me to go and seek medical help, which is another main pillar for the Gynae Project. It's around advocacy from others and self-advocacy. So, like, finding the confidence in yourself to go and ask the questions. Like, there is so much like ambiguity around what is normal and what is not. But I think for the best part of our lives, especially once you're like into your late 20s and early 30s at least, you kind of know what feels normal for you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
whether it's like when you wake up, when you wake up and you feel like, oh, my back feels funny. Like, that's not normal for you. So if it continues, to seek medical advice. So I think it's about that. Like, there's still no real definition from what I've learned that indicates what is a normal period.
Yeah.
So I think it has to come down, at least now, since we don't have all of the data to suggest what is and what isn't, it has to come from like personal conviction.
Yeah.
So like, what feels normal for me? Okay, cool. If I had a stomachache for 5 days and I wasn't on my period, that wouldn't be normal. So if I've got a stomachache while I'm on my period, it's kind of got to signpost you to find help. But in a lot of ways, even in having those conversations earlier, it really is about who's on the other side of that conversation. Because medical gaslighting is a real epidemic.
Yeah. And I think, you've highlighted the importance of, just conversation and the power of voice. A lot of people, go through things, and without having discussions with, peer groups and friendship groups and colleagues, like, you internalize things, you keep it to
100%.
yourself, and you feel like
100%.
you're the only person
100%.
that is going through something. So how important are those conversations, just by asking someone, actually, do you know what, are you experiencing this as well? And someone turning around and saying, yeah, that doesn't sound right. That's the light bulb where you're saying, okay, you know what, maybe I should go and, seek help.
Yeah.
And I'm also interested to know, we speak about advocacy, you talk about your experience of, seeking guidance, or, seeking guidance and advice from your friend. Where does the role of parent come into this? Because I would just assume that, as a girl, you're going through girls' things, you would just speak to your mum, and your mum would sort of be the advocate for you in terms of, actually, that doesn't sound right, or let's go and, do this together. Because I'm still stuck at, you was experiencing it your whole life, but you went by yourself at 25, when you could have gone with mum or auntie or, someone like
what?
that.
I actually did speak to my mum about it. But I think what we've got to also remember is that our parents grinned and bared so much. Like, whether it's like a health issue, a work issue, they just grinned and bared so much. And a lot of what I've experienced in terms of my period now couldn't be more different to what my mum's period was like. So when I'm at home, when I was like 17, 18, just like on the sofa with a hot water bottle, just wishing it would just go away, she was like, what's going on, man? Like, how come this is mad? Like, I didn't have this.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, again, it's all that attributed to, like, I didn't have this, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have this. Like, if I had a headache and it was really bad, and when you get headaches, it's not so bad, it wouldn't send alarm bells initially. And when I've spoken to my mum, but like, she's been the biggest advocate for me. That's in a lot of ways. And I want to say that even when I started my period, I was actually at home with my dad. And he was like, "It's okay. This is normal."
Big up, pops.
Honestly, every single time, this is normal. They took my mum and dad like made me take the day off school. I went to my local town and got some ice cream, but my mum had bought me a book about periods. Maybe a couple months before, I'd say, because I remember having read it way before I'd even started. But it was very anatomy based. Like, this is what's happening in your body, as opposed to what I think is really important now is the hormonal changes, and like really dialing in on what that means and how that affects your everything, your mental. Like, your people always say your gut is your second brain, and your womb is near your gut. So like in a lot of ways, all of that's connected. Like, nothing's separate from each other. And I think after just normalizing it for so long, I think I just took the personal agency to be like, do you know what? I need to find an answer for this. Like, if it was up to my mum, I would have been down there from early.
Yeah.
But I think there's that. I think for me, there was also that element of, again, I'm kind of going back in my mind to try and think about what type of person I was at the time. But likely, like, nah, man, I can do it. Like, I don't need that. I can just take a tablet and just crack on. Do you know what I mean? But instead, like, no, there's actually a medical condition here, and you should get it seen to sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, that's important, and I think just hearing what you're saying and hearing this conversation and just like internalizing everything, it just highlights the importance of whether your mum, dad, whatever role you take in terms of parenting, like these conversations like are still important. I think often we used to think that anything regarding periods, it's the mum's duty and the mum needs to focus on that. But I've got nieces. I've got my goddaughters. I may have a daughter in the future. My boys who listen and lock into the podcast, they have daughters, and it's important about knowing the impact of this and how you can support. And because I'm reflecting, when I was working as a head of year, and we used to have girls who would have who would be on their periods. If my colleague wasn't in, and I could be the head of year, my colleague wasn't the head of year, and she was female, coming, oh sir, is Miss Fear on here? No, she's not in. Why? Oh, nothing.
Yeah.
And I know why. And I was thinking, like, how do I create an environment so they feel comfortable to say, I need a pad or whatever, or they feel comfortable to say, you know what, I'm not feeling well because I'm on my period and whatever else. To be honest, there were some girls that didn't care. So I'm on my period. Where's the pads? Open the locker, sort of thing. But there were some who dealt with whatever they were going through, hormonal, like the mental, the physical, the emotional, like by themselves. And I felt bad, but I also felt like I didn't know and I didn't have the knowledge at the time to understand what they were going through beyond it's just your time of the month. So I think, it's important to have that conversation. And, thinking about support as well. I've spoken to, a lot of people like, female friends or whatever, who I've spoken about time and time again. They've gone to the GP and just get brushed back and whatever else. What was the difference with your GPs? Because hearing you say, you know what, my GP was my biggest advocate, like there's going to be people that are listening thinking, yeah, like my GP's a waste, man.
Yeah.
So what was the difference with yours?
Do you know what? I think part of the difference was that my primary GP is female. That doesn't always make a difference.
Okay.
But I think the fact that she was female made a difference. And also when it comes to my health, and this is also something that I'm really mindful of, is that like women have to go back and back and back and back and back to discuss their pain at any level. So like if a woman's in pain, whether it's, again, a headache, period cramps, stomach ache, anything, like we have to advocate so much more for our pain. And I think for me, it was the like, I was like, wait, like it's mad for me. Like I was very forthcoming, but I also feel like you shouldn't have to be forthcoming to get seen to. So I actually can't link why it might have been different. But what I can say is that when I spoke to my male GP about it, he brushed me. Like when I'd got to the point where I'd kind of like done a few blood tests and now I was kind of being moved along the process to speak to a gynecologist, something else popped up for me in my body, and I was like, I rang the GP and I said, like I'm this far along, but I feel like this is happening. And he was like, do you know what? Maybe it's just what did he say? I know what he said. I said, yeah, I feel like I was quite concerned about something and I really want to get seen to quite soon. And he was like, do you know what? I'm kind of dealing with lots of urgent cases. And I said, at what metric do you find that this isn't urgent? Because just because it's not COVID, it doesn't mean it's not urgent, because the ramifications of this for me and my life actually require an urgent response, because so much is affected if this isn't dealt with, i.e. my ability to show up to work, my ability to show up in relationships, my ability, like so many things are affected by, like, for example, 1 in 3 girls are missing school in the UK because of their periods. So not only is period education being missed, their formative education is being missed. And you don't consider that urgent. That's like the 3 of us that are here today, 1 of us not being at school. Do you know what I mean? Like, that number's mad. So I think I can't place why it might have been different, but I definitely think the fact that she was female helped.
Yeah. And I think just hearing, you talk about like the male GP, and that's across the board in a lot of professions. It's like the side eye, it's it's the time of the month for them. And I recall as well, teachers, female and male, if someone was on their period and it's like, sir, like, this is how I'm feeling, or I can't be in the class and whatever else, like they would get brushed off. Like, they would get brushed off. Like, it was like, how can you not, like, how do you not have like the strength to just handle that and push through? And looking back, like, that wasn't like the right thing to do, and that's because I've been maybe intentional with like learning about how periods impact, like the female body and hormones and fibroids and all of these other things that I didn't know about, and I'm hoping none of my students can recount and be like, actually, you know what, sir, when I was on my period and I was very sort of conscious of that, but it is something that impacts.
According to the data that we've collated, so alongside events and content, and we've circulated a survey to help collate new data around women's health experiences, particularly around their periods. So at the moment, 50% of women have what we call a regular cycle, so around 28 days, but most of them are prescribed medication. So if the longer the diagnosis time takes, the longer those women who have regular cycles and are still prescribed medication are in pain. 61% of those women, according to the data we've collated, are cramping every month, and 74% of those women would consider their period a massive or moderate, like have a massively or moderately negative effect on their daily lives. So even if I just take all of those numbers and compile it into how that then affects a woman, like waking up in the morning, like that process needs to be expedited somehow. And that's where, for me, the Gynae Project comes in, because again, like a data that came out towards the end of last year, just shy of 700,000 women are waiting to see a gynecologist. Like, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and there'll be 700,000 gynecologists that have just gone into practice. So it's like, what happens in the meantime? And that's the role that I am structuring the Gynae Project to play. And that looks like having conversations like this. So I couldn't be more grateful for this opportunity, because I think the last podcast episode that I released had a man on it. So this feels pretty full circle to now be talking about it on a male's podcast, because everybody's affected by it. And I think for me, it's like, how can we start with conversation and start with community? Like, again, data-wise, 38% of women and girls have talked about their periods regularly in the last 3 years with friends and family. And then the next percentage after that, which I think is 32%, had then gone to speak to a medical professional. But if the survey is sent out to 250 women, 38% of that is what? 25? I can't do the maths quickly, but do you know what I mean? It's not a lot of people that are going to the GP. So for me, right now, it's like, whilst you might be number 700,001, to see a gynecologist,
Yeah.
you can't be expected to wait for 700,000 people to see someone before you do something.
That's crazy.
Exactly. So it's like,
That's
all right,
crazy.
what can happen in the meantime? And that's where the Gynae Project comes in terms of let's build community. Let's start by having the conversation away from just like the anatomy based conversation. Like, this is what's happening in your body. But it's like what you said. Are you experiencing this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, me too, you know. Okay, what are you doing? And because even when we think about like our ancestors and like how all of our culture came together, it was through community.
Yeah.
Like whenever anything happened, good or bad, community was there. So I felt really inspired by just how I came up, and creating that for the Gynae Project. So there's women that could actually reason and talk to each other. If I think about the data that's been pulled from my survey so far and the ramifications of that for a woman's life, yeah, it's got to be quicker than words.
And how is your data used? So you're extracting your data,
Yeah.
which is amazing data. And if I was someone in the NHS or Department of Health or whatever, I would be screaming at your door and saying, give me this data. So how is your data being like used beyond the Gynae Project?
So I'm actually using it to inform events and content and conversation at the moment. So it's kind of like the springboard that everything comes off of, but I'm building it out. I've got like a respondent number I've got in my brain that I want to get to before I start actually extrapolating it into a report. Because I want to be able to present. Yeah, I want to be able to present it so a systemic change can happen. And we know for something like this, again, if just shy of 700,000 women are waiting, like I can't just be like a black girl at the door, like, listen, this needs like the numbers don't lie. Like that's how change is going to happen. It has to come from real life experiences. And I also couldn't be more grateful for all of the women who have trusted the Gynae Project to complete that survey, because there's also a disconnect when it comes to black people in general. Although the Gynae Project isn't exclusively for black people, for black women, there is a distrust when it comes to black people giving their information when it comes to medical.
Because it's qualitative.
It's qualitative.
Like you need to be open. You need to share
honest,
your experiences. Yeah.
And for so long, black people were guinea pigs of things. Yeah. So when the medical system were trying out new tablets and procedures, it was black bodies that were being used to see if it worked. So there's that trauma that's attached to like all of that. So I, especially to all of the black women in particular who have trusted the Gynae Project to fill out that survey to help us help them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, for those who are listening, who are thinking, the Gynae Project sounds, amazing, they want to know more or they want to contribute to like your surveys and whatever else, how can they get involved with your project beyond just the sort of follow button and listening to the podcast, which again is amazing, but being intentional, like how can they support?
So there's loads of calls to action on our survey that invites you to join our research. All of the data is safe and protected by GDPR, so that doesn't go anywhere outside of the Gynae Project, like virtual premises. And come to our events, man. Like the launch was it was a vibe. For me as well, based on the nature of conversation, I know that it's typically riddled with taboo, riddled with shame, riddled with a little bit of scarcity as well. So as a result, I was like, right, how can I engage this conversation in a way that doesn't feel as harsh? So the launch event was a spin class called On Your Cycle, and it was a way to start the conversation around how movement also affects your menstrual cycle. And naturally, when you move your body, you've got more vitality anyway. So, and I'm a big lifestyle advocate. Like, again, if we look at that 700,000 people waiting, it's like, what can women do whilst they're waiting? And it's like dialing into some lifestyle habits that actually do and have data to suggest that they make a change, and people have been able to reverse conditions by just changing their lifestyle. So movement being one of them, nutrition being another one, sleep and quality of rest, a bit like stress levels in your body, and also like a sense of purpose. I think all of those things help. So coming to events, plugging into our newsletter, because that's got loads of information in it about what we're doing and where you can kind of catch us at the next thing. And more than anything, just like, the podcast is really important, is a great tool as well from like an educational perspective. Like Womenstrual, the podcast is a space to talk about ebbs and flows of life, the expertise of whoever the guest is, and also a safe space to
Yeah.
discuss periods. Because I think periods right now, in my view, can't in order for it to be it to feel like a safe conversation, you can't come in heavy. Like, it has to feel like, all right, cool, let's start having the conversation. Let's begin talking about your personal experience before we start shouting and screaming at the NHS. Because as much as there's lots to not be happy about, they are inundated with so many different things. So I think we do have to like put some respect on their names at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say plug into our events, fill out the survey. It's signposted all over our website. And be part of it.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms of like normalizing, those conversations that's surrounded by, a lot of stigma and creating those safe spaces, if we're thinking about, people who, are listening to, this episode, and I'm thinking, about any of, the boys who have like daughters and whatever else, nieces, or even with like their girlfriends and wives, like to just be able to start those conversations, because those aren't conversations that are had within the home. They're not conversations that are had with within schools. I only left my role as head of year in 2022, and even then I worked there 5 years in that role, and we didn't have conversations around that. And if there were, like you said, it was just about the anatomy, but not thinking about the hormones, the societal impact, emotional, physical, mental health, and how it's impacting, your sort of everyday life. So I guess the question for me is, how do we normalize having those conversations in school, in the family home, and in the wider community?
Yeah, I think in order to normalize it, we have to accept that it's normal. And it's also not unhygienic, and it's also not unsanitary. Like, I think because of those stigmas, it makes talking about it feel
Yeah. As soon as you said unhygienic, I was like,
yeah.
because that's how I used to think of it.
Even I did as
You're
a
on your
child.
period, like
Yeah,
yeah.
And I think removing those things and starting with, this is a normal bodily function, and I think that helps like set the tone. I think also just like leaning in with understanding, especially as a man in the conversation. I think it's like, don't make fun of her unless she's making fun of herself. Like, I know sometimes like you're and we'll post content like that, like, oh wow, I'm in my luteal phase, which is typically the phase just before your menstrual phase, where your emotions are everywhere. And we posted something the other day of this girl standing behind her boyfriend, and the caption was like, wondering whether you should break up with him or are you just about to start your period. Like, because that's actually what happens to you. You think, should I still be like, you question so much, like that's why the hormonal impact is really important. And even me, like, I've really started to tailor my life around the phases of my menstrual cycle. As much as it sounds like an extra thing to do, I've actually felt so much more empowered in my life, because I know I don't have to like throw myself at stuff in the phase just before my period actually starts, because I don't have the energy. Whereas like the phases before, I'm out, I'm doing stuff, I'm active, I've got energy and all of that kind of stuff. But I definitely think leaning into the fact that it's normal, it's not unhygienic, and it's not unsanitary, and just learning. Like, there's so much that even people in the space don't know. Like, there's new research and new findings that are like happening all the time. So we're constantly kind of keeping up with all of the new things that are happening in the women's health space, especially when it comes to periods and like new conditions that are coming out and like all of that. So it is going to take time, but I think leaning in with understanding and just, I think just being there, and creating safe space for discussion, and not like going like this when when women are talking.
Yeah. It's interesting when, when you were talking about essentially, managing and adjusting your life around, your period, because really, if the hormonal impact is as great as we're saying. What you often find, with girls and women in terms of like their behaviors, their characters, their emotions, like everything's maybe not disrupted is the, you know the best word, but everything changes, and it's like it's like a wave or sea of
Yeah.
emotions. Like
Yeah.
things are going up and down, but I think acknowledging that that happens during that time and putting things in place to ensure that actually I know that during this period I'm more likely to be like this, or I'm more likely to do that X, Y, and Z. Like that's just an amazing way to sort of navigate like your experiences, and sort of people listening to this might reflect and be like, actually, do you know what? I realized that when I'm on, or when I'm about to be on, I'm more snappy, or I'm more this, or I'm more that.
Yeah.
But it's a learning period for your support system as well, because now it's like,
You have to
okay,
take it personal.
it's not a personal thing,
You have to take it personal.
because that's what people used to do.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they'll take it personal. Like, why are you being like this? But then, sort of managing that, you get to
Yeah.
because I know it now. I've
Yeah.
sussed it now with
Yeah,
like
yeah,
sisters, wife, like
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
I've sussed it. Time. Okay, cool. This is this is how I move. But it had to be a learning curve, because it was like, why are you beefing me every month? Like,
Yeah,
why
yeah, yeah.
every month? But you're not putting two and two.
Yeah, yeah. And even that language,
together.
like, why are you beefing me every month? It's like the light bulb went on. Oh yeah, that's why you're beefing me every month, because something happens with your hormones every month, and that's what's affecting my emotions. So yeah, I think it's
And what advice would you give to like parents or educators who want to be, you know, proactive in terms of like supporting, um, supporting like their females and like young students
yeah.
with like the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, yeah. I prefer to say I'm not a parent yet, but from an educational perspective, in particular, I'd actually say, and actually from a parental, I would say actually take the girl's pain seriously. Like, I think that also is something that has probably left many women just in pain for far too long, or like longer than they need to be, because someone just thought, ah, man, it's just your period. Or it's just a period, or there was actually a campaign called Just a Period that talked about exactly this. So like just being dismissed and brushed off just because you're in pain. But if you had a headache, again, I keep going back to headache, but if you had a headache, someone would say, oh my goodness, okay, let's get you even if they said let's get you a tablet, or like let's get you there's like at least some like care that goes around managing that. And I definitely think maybe having, I know that I don't actually know if there's like general studies in schools anymore, but I feel like we were called
Citizenship,
PhD, yeah, all
PSHE,
PhD,
and
yeah.
whatever else. Yeah.
But I also think there maybe should now be like a health and well-being like version of that, so that it covers a few different things that are like real life experiences that can help you once you go out into the world, and learn a little bit more about your body from less of a like anatomical perspective, but actually about like, okay, because your period change as your body changes, as did your period. So how my period was at 15 was very different to how it was at 20, and then at 25, and then at 30, and now in my 30s. So it's like all of these things make a difference.
Those changes, is it because of like the context in which you're now living in? So what I mean is like having a period as a student, having a period as a university student, having a period as someone who's going into work, or
Yeah,
having a period
yeah,
as a wife, and
yeah.
does the context
Context,
around
yeah, definitely,
impact it?
definitely. And that links back to like level of stress, like because I have found that when I have been stressed, my period is actually different. It's more painful.
Interesting.
Like even like looks wise, it's different. So and as you like kind of journey through life, the pressures of life like come onto you as you get older, because you're a lot more independent. So like when you're living at home, it's one thing, and then when you move out to go to uni, it's another thing, and when you go into the world of work and you deal with all of that, it's another thing, and all of those things affect your hormonal balance. So, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
No, that's interesting. We've spoken a lot about, hormones, and its impact. And I wanted to know, uh, how does, at the height of, when, your periods were really affecting you and it was impacting on your emotions, what did that look like in
yeah,
terms of, like, how were you feeling, so we can sort of share with the
yeah,
audience, like, in terms of my emotion,
yeah,
this is how
yeah,
I was feeling,
yeah.
like, going through this pain. Like, what does it feel like emotionally?
I was so sad, and I just my life felt really crippling.
Wow.
In a lot of ways, I felt like, oh, like, is this what I have to go through my entire life? Like, every month I have to like go through this feeling, and it's not something I can control. It's not like if you're, I don't know, you've got a friend or a partner who's like annoying, and then, or like you're not really getting on. You can control that. You can say, do you know what, we're good here.
Yeah.
But like with a period, you can't say we're good here.
Yeah.
Like, you can take treatment to subside things, but you can't just completely eradicate it from your life forever. So it is something that made me think, wow, like, this is ghetto, man. Like,
Yeah.
this feeling's not fun. And I remember when I was auditioning for, I was a dance student, so I did dance at uni, and I was auditioning for uni, and I was on day 2 of my period, and that usually is my most, like, treacherous day. And obviously, as a dance student, you got to dance in the audition. I literally danced for maybe 15 minutes of that audition, and the audition was an hour and a half. I was literally back and forth to the toilet, back and forth, back and forth. Naturally, I was more nervous because I was in an audition, but that aside, I just was in so much pain, and I just thought, this is awful. Like, this is actually awful. And I remember at the end of the audition, I went up to the teacher and I said to her, look, like, I'm so sorry, like, I'm just in so much pain today, da, da, da. And she looked at me and she said, you've done enough. And because at the end, we had like after we'd learnt the routine, we just got to perform it and then be done. And then she looked at me and said, you've done enough. And I just was like, okay, I don't know what that means. I don't know you. I know what that statement might allude to, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I got accepted.
Wow.
So that for me has always been like a pinnacle moment in my life where I've like pushed through the pain, but like, shouldn't have to.
You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to push through the pain. And, there's so many people that are experiencing that. And, I've spoken to so many people that I know have those experiences where they're having, to push through the pain, where they feel that they are, being unheard, having to go back, time and time again to the GP, time and time again to the hospital, time and time again. And, the impact that it has on, a female's life is very telling. And sometimes, people don't see this, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to this. And, earlier you were speaking about, the long waiting list for gynecologists. And, even questions can be had about, where are they? Why aren't people applying for those roles?
Yeah,
Or
I
how
thought that
difficult
too.
is it to
Yeah,
get into
yeah,
that role? And
yeah,
what are the qualifications needed? Like, there's so many things,
yeah,
funding around, NHS and whatever else. So, it's definitely that an issue that needs for us to be having these conversations, and for these conversations essentially to be, stepping stones to wider conversations where we can impact the people that are in charge and say, actually, do you know what, we need to do better.
yeah,
We need, to be better,
yeah.
because this is, it's impacting, a lot of people. And we haven't, spoken about, and I want to address this before we finish off. But in terms of the mental health, like, how does periods impact, like, a female's
Yeah,
mental health
yeah,
when they're going through that process?
yeah. Again, like, because it's a hormonal change, naturally your mental is affected. I'm not a therapist, so I can't speak exactly on what is chemically happening. But I know from my own experience, my emotions are just all over the place. But also, what I have learned is because I am now much more aware of the 4 different phases of my menstrual cycle. So the first phase, your menstrual phase is when you're actually having a period, and then after that is your follicular phase, which is typically where you have the most energy. Like you're social, you're out, etc. The next phase is the ovulation phase, so it's actually when your body's preparing for the pregnancy, and that's typically where you feel a little bit more sensual, etc. Your luteal phase is the phase just before your menstrual phase, where that's where your emotions start to dip. All of a sudden, you just feel like I'm so ugly, or I'm so this, or I'm so that, and just dramatic. But it does level out. But because I know that, I no longer take them things personal.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? So like when I'm in my luteal phase and I might be saying, oh, but this, making up some, telling the story I want to tell myself, I also know like, you don't have to take it personal.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow you're going to be in your menstrual phase and you'll be like, oh, that was why.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
No.
So that's how I've kind of managed my mental health in light of my period.
Yeah. So what was the third phase, the sensual one? Because I know the man then will be listening, saying, "Yeah."
Let me write that down. Let
me write that down.
Yeah.
So
the ovulation phase. Yeah.
So I know the man them already. Yeah. I'll timestamp this for the man them. So
after she starts busybody,
9 months from today, we'll
see.
we'll be seeing
we'll
see. what's going on. So yeah. And before as we finish off, the final question I wanted to ask.
Great, thank you.
No, it's honestly it's been amazing. I've learned so much, and it's just been an amazing episode, and I really do hope, and I know that amazing things will come from the survey, and like the report's gonna happen, and that's going to be that's going to be the impact, the change maker, and it just starts with a seed. You had a dream, because the Gynae Project was a dream essentially one day, and
like
now
dream.
it's reality. In the same way, the report is a dream, and it's going to become reality, and it will impact people, and that's amazing. And as we finish off, I just wanted to ask if there's one thing that you want the audience to take away from today in regards to education around like menstrual cycle and periods. Like, what's the one key thing that you would want them to take from today's message?
Learning your body is a learning curve in itself. So if, for example, your period is different to how it was before, don't beat yourself up. This is to women in particular. So don't beat yourself up if your period is changing as you change and as you grow and as you evolve. Like, that is normal. The same way your hair changes, the same way your face changes, the same way your skin changes. All of these changes are normal and a bodily function. So don't beat yourself up. I think also, like, I cannot stress how empowered I feel by now tailoring my life to the phases of my menstrual cycle. I feel so much more productive. I'm not killing myself to act like how I do in my most productive phase. When I'm on my period, I can't do it. Like, I'm not doing it. Like, I've literally, like, even on that phase, like in my diary, at the top of it, it's got a space where you can write an intention. And that intention on that week is essential tasks only. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
I don't put bare things in there, and I don't care. Like, and it's about like taking that personal agency to live your life on your own terms. And I think in tailoring my life, that's what I've been able to like step into. So yeah, I'd say definitely like just embrace your body in its changes, tailor your life to the phases, follow the Gynae Project.
100%. Yeah.
And I'd say for men, just be a listening ear.
Yeah.
Be a listening ear, for sure.
No. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's been amazing having you on the show. This has been the Too Cool for School podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube page and follow us on all of our social media platforms. Thank you.